Well, hello and welcome to today's first thematic session dedicated to rising urbanization, changing demographics, and the need for green mobility. My name is François Berger, and I'll be the moderator. I'm the executive director for the Long Term Infrastructure Investor Association. Just a few words about our structure, LTIIA. It's an association gathering 40 odd institutional investors across the world, both on the asset owner side, the likes of life insurance companies, pension funds, or foundations, and on the asset managers side, specialized infrastructure investment funds, all sharing the same long-term DNA and interest in sustainable infrastructure. We do believe that this long-term view when investing in infrastructure drives the best outcomes for all, enabling sustainable development for communities and countries. Now, I'd like to set the scene for our upcoming panel discussion. It's often said the main drivers for infrastructure are the so-called 3Ds: demographics, digitalization, and decarbonation. This session will deal more specifically with demographics and decarbonation, with a focus on the transport sector, but in the process, we'll no doubt refer to digitalization as well as a lever to scale up, optimize, or in some cases, maybe substitute to conventional transportation and mobility solutions. Over 50% of the global population now is urban. With urbanization come a lot of economic and social opportunities, but good mobility systems are a precondition to take full advantage of those opportunities. The stakes are huge to shift existing mobility systems to green, both in OECD, developed economies, and to create those new mobility systems in emerging markets and developing economies. These shifts already require huge amounts of resources, and of course, attracting private capital to those new technical and managerial developments, in some cases pretty disruptive developments, may prove to be a challenge. We'll discuss during this panel how best to attract and manage this private sector input from the financial but also managerial standpoint, and what first lessons or success stories can be drawn from the first developments that our panelists have been involved in or have witnessed from their respective standpoint. And from that, we have assembled a distinguished panel of specialists, and I believe a very balanced one. We have gender parity, 2 men and 2 women, parity between those panelists representing developed economies, or OECD type, and developing economies or multilaterals specializing on developing issues. We have a balance as well between the 2 panelists hailing from a public background or multilateral, and the 2 panelists hailing from the private sector. So a very balanced and, I believe, interesting panel to try and address as much as possible these various issues and challenges we are identifying. I'll now turn to them to briefly introduce themselves and maybe say a few words about their structures. So let's proceed. Ladies first. Gibet, if you'd like to go first.
Yes, thank you, Francois. I hope you can hear me well. I'm very happy to be joining you today, Francois, and all the other panelists for this conversation. I work for the public transport operator from the city of Barcelona and its metropolitan area. My company's name is Transports Metropolitans de Barcelona, and we operate both the metro and the bus networks from Barcelona and some of the touristic services. And we are currently launching also a bike sharing service that should start to be operating during next year. Well, we will have the opportunity to talk about some of our specific projects from the company, And once again, I'm very happy to be here, and thanks a lot for inviting me to join this conversation.
Thanks, Gibet. Over to you, Stefania.
Hello, good morning or good afternoon. I don't know where you are in the world. And thank you very much for this invitation. I'm really happy to join this session and to discuss this very important issue with you all. My name is Stefania Di Serio. I'm a transport engineer. I have a huge experience, more than 20 years in public transportation environment. And since 7 years, I joined Almaviva, that is an ICT company. One of the biggest ICT company in Italy. And we are dealing with all the digitalization on public transportation. We are working with a public transportation company, train company, and airport. So very happy to be here and to participate in the discussion.
Thanks, Stefania. Grégoire?
Good morning, good afternoon. So I'm Grégoire Gauthier. I am a senior transport specialist. I am based in Vienna, Austria. I currently work for the Europe and Central Asia division and urban and transport topics. Right. So the World Bank, I'll be very fast. We are very active in the field of urban mobility. As part of transport, and you'll soon hear a few examples during my talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Grégoire. Mathieu, if you can hear me, the floor is yours. Mathieu, you're on mute. Yeah.
Yes, good morning, everyone. My name is Mathieu Peller. I am Africa CEO at Meridiam. Meridiam is a developer and investor in public infrastructure globally in North America, Africa, and Europe. We develop and invest with a long-term horizon in infrastructure projects in transport, clean energy, social infrastructure, environmental services, and we develop these projects with a mission to have impact and focus on the SDG own proprietary SDG methodology we have, and we want to achieve both financial and extra financial impact. So we have a few projects in public transport, in particular in Africa, and I will share that later.
Thank you, Mathieu. So as you see, a very diversified and experience-rich panel. And let me now dive into the substance of our discussion. I'd like first to proceed to a sort of a helicopter view of the macroeconomic trends and drivers and issues in terms of mobility seen from the different standpoints of our panelists. So let me start with you, Grégoire. There's probably no better global standpoint than the World Bank Group to provide this sort of overall view. So what would be, in your views, the main trends and issues at stake that you're now witnessing in the field of mobility, as we say? A few years ago, we would have talked about transport. Now it's mobility. And what is your assessment on how they might reshape the global mobility landscape?
Yeah. Thank you, Francois. And just a few numbers about the demographics that you were highlighting in your introduction, because absolutely this is a critical trend. What we've seen over the last 30 years is that the world population in city has increased by 2.5 billion people. So that's huge, and this is really something which is going to be driving more and more the demand for urban mobility. I mean, as you said before, I mean, in the developed world, we have around 80% of the population in city, whereas the world average is only 55. So you see that there is still a huge growth potential for cities, for urban population, and then for urban transport and urban mobility demand. And we know that it's not by chance. I mean, there are many good reasons for cities to grow, and the World Bank has studied that a lot, among others, because of economies of scale, because of the multiplication of interaction between businesses, between stakeholders, and we've seen actually this in I have to say that en creux, if you allow me, when COVID struck these past years, and with so many exchanges that have been done. I'll just point out four concerns that we have resulting from urban mobility. These are congestion, air quality, road safety, and greenhouse gases emission. So on congestion, I mean, that's really the problem. That's really what we try to fight. In the EU, European Union only, so, advanced economy, the cost of congestion is something around 300 billion euros a year, 300 billion euros. So huge disincentives, huge costs, and huge investment to try to address this congestion issue. Air quality, the same, taking the EU example, it's been assessed that more than 90% of EU citizens are exposed to level of air quality that go beyond the WHO standards. And if you see that even in Europe, it's already the case, you can imagine what's going on in Lagos, in Sao Paulo, and elsewhere. Overall, 4 million people, I mean, die prematurely from air pollution and lung diseases. And so you see also there is a very strong human capital consideration linked to these social and environmental externalities. Road safety, be fast. I mean, again, huge social costs. It's more than 1 million people a year that die in car crashes, and it's about 40% within cities. And even more worrisome, if you take, the share of bikers and people who and pedestrians that they represent around same 30%. So these vulnerable users are very at stake. And last thing, with this very rapid overview, I mean, greenhouse gases and CO2 emission. You mentioned, Francois, the decarbonization agenda. So it's been assessed that urban mobility, urban cars, because that's mainly that, it's a little less than 25, a quarter of the overall transport emission. So there is a lot of things to do, many things are at stake. And we have, the toolbox to try to address that. Actually, in urban environment is pretty well known. I mean, it's for us and many others are articulated around this idea of trying to avoid unnecessary trips. I mean, and here we may discuss later on about the benefits of digitization, about what we've learned also thanks to the COVID part. I mean, avoiding trip when necessary, about also all the activities related to shifting. I mean, and here we have all these patterns to try to strengthen public transport. I'm sure Gilbert will say a few words about that, but also to first one go more and more towards active mobility. And last part of this toolbox, trying to improve what we have, and this is all these investment and policy related to fuel efficiency, to better transport. Let me just conclude this short talk by here in Vienna. I was yesterday part to a panel with the Vienna city government, and and they have super nice plans about trying to have so-called the 15-minute city. So trying precisely to have more integrated environment, and try to reduce mobility needs or shorten them. Let me stop here. I'll be happy, of course, to explain later on during the discussion.
Yeah, indeed, Greg. Well, thanks for this very broad landscape that you set up. Indeed, highlighting not just the economic, but the human capital dimension of green mobility. In the process, we may come back to revisit some of the issues you identified in the latter part of the session. But let me now turn to Tibet. So yours is the standpoint of a public transportation authority, a metropolitan transportation authority in a developed country. What are you seeing in terms of trends? And in particular, I think we'd be interested to know whether you're seeing any lasting impact of COVID on end user behavior patterns when it comes to using mass transit like the Metro de Barcelona.
Thank you, Francois. Yes, well, TMB is actually the public transport operator. So we are not the transport authority, we are the transport operator from the metro and bus networks and some touristic services as well. So what we have seen in Barcelona and its metropolitan area, which is the place where we are operating public transportation. Nowadays we can say, and we are actually very proud of it, because at least on our metro network, we are almost already back to 90% of the demand that we used to have before COVID-19, before the pandemics. On our bus network, we are, it depends on the days, but we are at around 80%. And actually, we think that this difference between the metro and the bus networks are also linked to the users of each of these networks. So in the bus network, maybe we have some elder people who, even if the pandemic, we would like to say that it is almost over, but maybe some of those people are not completely back to the use of public transportation. Whereas in the metro network, we can really see that people are back on track. Let me use these words. And actually, even if, of course, thanks to COVID or due to COVID, now many people are also, and lots of companies here in Barcelona also are in some hybrid work. So some people can work from home some days and then they go back to the offices. But actually, the mobility trends from our metro network indicate that several people have been moving again around our metropolitan area. Let me mention Francois from the World Bank was mentioning about the 3Ds that at the beginning you were talking about. So Grégoire mentioned the demographics from the World Bank, and I would like to highlight maybe some points about this digitalization and about decarbonization, because these 2 points are very important to improve the mobility in our cities in developed countries. What we have seen, I think it was already the case before COVID, but COVID has made our users even more exigeant. So they really want to know how to use this public transportation, and they want to move door to door. It's not anymore a matter of taking them from point A to point B, but they really want all the information, and they want good mobility as a service to really organize their mobility trends. And this is not anymore only about going from home to work, but this is also about including all the intermediate steps that you can have in a city during your daily life. So I think that digitalization is playing a big role in order to improve public transportation, but of course without forgetting about the need of public transportation to be inclusive. So we are working very hard in Barcelona, and we are starting to see the results of also having made our transport network accessible for all. So we have 95% of our metro stations which are accessible. So this means that you have always an elevator or some kind of measure to make that metro station accessible. And also we are improving a lot the measures to make our network safe, so that all users, whether they are men, women, young or older, and whether they use the network at day or at night, they can feel safe. So this also needs a lot of measures in our infrastructure network to make it accessible and inclusive. And last, I think that we will develop it maybe later in our discussion, but of course you mentioned also, Francois, decarbonization. And of course, mobility has a key role to play in the energy transition. And we have a lot to do in our cities to improve energy transition with our transportation modes. And I think maybe later on I can tell you a little bit more of some of our projects where we have been working not only from the public sector, but also together with the private sector and private sector investment in order to move to this decarbonization of our transport network. I cannot hear you, Francois, sorry.
Thank you, Tibet. And I'm sure we'll revisit some of those issues you highlighted, whether it's about digitalization in a moment with Stefania, or issues about affordability, accessibility, ensuring a sort of fair transition to green mobility. By the way, I think that the conference that we're now participating in is a good example of digitalization substituting in a way to traditional transportation mobility services. Would have been a challenge in any case to convene more than 1,000 participants which are registered to this conference to a physical place for an in-presence sort of a meeting. So a very good example of how digitalization can indeed substitute in some cases to traditional conventional transport. Now, I'd like to turn to Stefania. We mentioned digitalization. You're an ICT specialist, and Alma Viva, your company, is. So could you elaborate a little bit on how, indeed, digital infrastructure can help optimize a range through a mobility as a service, or in some cases substitute for conventional transportation mobility? And what are your views on the trends that are now taking place? Over to you. You're on mute, Stefania. We can't hear you yet. We seem to have a technical issue. Looks like digitalization is not yet fully operational in our case. So let's give Stefania another 30 seconds to get back on stage. If she isn't in a situation to do so, we may move over to Mathieu, hoping for the best.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I don't know what's happened. I was unmuted. So anyway, doesn't matter. So this is technology is great when it works. So what we have already seen that the pandemic has had a very huge effect on our sector. That in reality has not changed the trend, has only accelerated the trend in the mobility sector. Because the trend was quite clear also before the pandemic. People was completely asking for a new kind of services. Mobility that was more personalized, more integrated, more intermodal, more personalized. That was a trend that was clear, really clear before the pandemic. And that, as an IT company dealing with the market, so trying to look forward to what is happening to us was quite clear. So what is happening to the pandemic? That the pandemic has turned the veil of Maya, to paraphrase Schopenhauer, on the need to address in a systemic way the mobility sector. You say properly, Francois. We are speaking about transport since a few years ago, but the real concept is mobility. And so the digitalization is also an instrument to go in this direction. And another trend that was completely new, because when we speak about mobility, we speak about transport, you can use the word that you like, very often we speak about offer. So we are offering public transport, we are offering metro network, we are offering bike, car sharing, or whatever. But this is the offer. What was clear in this pandemic event, that we have really strong to work on the demand side, because digitalization also can support the demand side. This is an example, okay? We are all in our houses and we have changed the offer in this, the demand in this case, not the offer. The offer is still, the airplane are still around, the train are still around, but we are in our home. And so the needs for putting together what are the goals, and so how the policy can reach this goal, and how the digital market can support, it's becoming really important. And so to us was really clear, and what we have experimented strongly in this pandemic, but again, I want to say that was a clear trend also before, that the mobility as a service, that let me say, that was a word and was let me say, an idea before the pandemic is becoming really it's really on the table. As a company, we are working in so many projects of mobility as a service. In Italy, we are working on 3 main cities, and we are working also around the world on these specific items. What does it mean? Means to use the data that we already have, because the city is full of data, and join this data in order to have an integrated platform, a digital platform that allow people to use all the resources available on the network. And so what I like to say is that mobility as a service is something that substitutes the or with the and. So till now we say we take a bus or a car, we take a bike or we're walking, but now with the mobility as a service, what we can do, we can take car and public transportation. We can pair bike and car sharing. This means that we can have really very possibility to move around cities in a very effective way. In order to effective and personalized, because this is really important. Because what we have to say that when we choose our first mean of transport in the day, so when we go out from the house, we didn't choose this means according to our first movement. So if we go to the office, we don't choose to go to the office by public transportation. We choose public transportation or whatever, only if for the next step of our trip, we can use it. Give you an example. I have to go to the office and then I go to gym, I go to take my kids, I go to see a friend, whatever. So if I cannot use public transportation for the next step because I have to go to the supermarket and I have heavy bags and I cannot carry it on a bus, I will take a car also for the first step. So it's really important that can be personalized. And the other thing that is really, really important is the real-time information. And in this case, the digitalization can be really useful because, okay, I choose my trip, I take public transportation, car sharing, or whatever, and then something happen in the network. What we do now, we inform our client, public transportation inform client, but they didn't provide an alternative. So if they say, okay, the train is broken, the street is closed, okay, so what? So what I have to do? And so that's why I take a car, because I say, okay, in this way I can manage my every problem in the city. And so this is really important. This is the company that we are trying to do with this with the platform that we have implemented. Because we really believe that data integration of data is fundamental. And another point that is really important, and that is also related to this panel, is how we found this kind of system. Because of course this needs money. A lot of money. At the moment, there are money on the table coming from in Europe, from European funds for the pandemic event, but we also need instrument to use this fund, because the connection between policy and technology has to be really strong, and different actors has to work together to really reach the goal. And the public partnership can be a way to do that. Because otherwise, the risk is this money will be not used in the proper way. And as I say, the green, that is, in my opinion, the new digital, the green will only become something that we speak about in these very nice places, but we not really reach the goal.
Thank you very much, Stefania, for highlighting these very, very interesting points on the importance of managing from the end user demand side, not just the supply side, issues linked with data collecting and curating, and which call for probably for a better public-private cooperation, and the specific role of public authorities in that respect, and also raising the issue of the cost to end users, whether we should go maybe in some cases to a full public funding to avoid charging the end user, and thus sort of fostering greater traffic from end users in mass transit systems, for example. We'll try to come back to some of these issues in the latter part of the session. But let me now turn to Mathieu, hoping that he can hear us. We seem to have some persisting issues about this video conferencing. So Mathieu, Grégoire alluded to the congested situation in many developing megapolis, and all of those we've gone to India or Nigeria or other big cities in emerging countries know for a fact that it can be a nightmare to circulate, to drive there. So, but at the same time, that there may be an advantage for a latecomer to transport mobility infrastructure. So I'd like to hear your views about, in particular, Africa, since you are in charge of this dedicated African fund at Meridiam. What are the trends you're seeing there? And could, under some conditions, developing countries like Sub-Saharan Africa skip directly to decarbonize the mobility and take advantage of there being latecomers to adopt latest generation mobility systems? Hope you can hear us. Over to you.
Yes, first of all, I'm very sorry because I do hear and see everyone but François, the moderator, which for speaking on a panel is not very convenient. I do hope you hear and see me, and look, I will do my best, and it will be a bit difficult to make reference to the question, but I will share my views on trend, what we see as investor in Sub-Saharan Africa. And whether the decarbonization of public transport is a possibility. I mean, as regards public transport in Africa, there are of course extremely powerful trends regarding the urbanization, of course, the growth of the population, the growth of the traffic and needs to move in large cities on the continent. And this is going with, first of all, a growth of the usage of cars, and therefore massive congestions, huge issues in terms of air quality, and therefore, of course, public transport is very much needed. There are very large numbers at stake, and therefore, as developer and an investor in public transport, we do believe that the demand and the need for mobility is here, and most of the public transport projects, when they are well planned, well designed, of course, in terms of itinerary and organization of the transport needs, they are sustainable. The key question is the affordability and the cost of the tariff. That's the number one question we have on all projects. But other than that, there is of course a huge case for public transport, and we see more and more projects coming, and I think that's the main challenge. There are the needs, there have been and there are still many buses, for example, which are deployed in cities. But what is needed, given the organization of cities and the existing congestion and the difficulties to plan in such large cities, that's really mass transit systems. For example, BRT, they are really the ones capable of carrying many people and capable of serving as a backbone for reorganizing a network. We see many attempts to do similar projects on the continent. There are a few ones which are successful, and I will speak later about a project we are developing. We are investing in Senegal, but that's what we see in many countries, and I think that's provided they are properly planned and the affordability question is well addressed. They are investable projects with an economic and a financial return. As regards to the decarbonization, that's a great opportunity. I believe there are many countries. That's a bit a paradox, but that's the reality in Africa, where there is a need to develop the demand of power. We see some of these countries like Kenya, Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, Senegal, where one way or the other, given the great success in developing IPPs, production of energy, there is a surplus of offer, and there is the need to develop a stable and predictable demand of energy. And there is a good match with the electric solutions, which are growing in public transport, either on rail or buses. And that's the opportunity to develop hand in hand both the public and the transport and the energy sector with the setup of projects that are going to become large users of electricity. Most of the time, that's what is needed, at least in the more advanced countries of the advanced continent. So I think there is an opportunity to bet on, to leverage on this possibility of using power, and what is extremely interesting for investors is that, of course, with electric mobility, not only you address long-term sustainability, that's of course very important, but you have a far more attractive investment proposition, because you have larger capex and far lower opex. So you have a far more stable and predictable investment, and that's easier in these conditions to mobilize large capital compared to, for example, the diesel bus solutions, where you have relatively low capex and high opex, which are on top of that extremely volatile, depending on the value of the fuel. So I think that's an opportunity which is interesting both for public authorities, for users, and for investors. Of course, it has to be developed first in countries where the power is here, and where as much as possible that's green power. It goes without saying. I will stop here, and I hope that was pretty much in line with your question, Francois.
Yes, indeed, Mathieu. Thanks for improvising, even though the liaison seems to be a bit deficient. And indeed, I think you made some very interesting points here that are a bit paradoxical. Point that some countries may actually have too much power, and this is a direct result of take-or-pay PPP models that have been successfully implemented in some of those developing countries in Africa, and Ghana or Ivory Coast come to mind. I believe there was a coverage by The Economist on that issue a few weeks ago. So indeed, electrifying mass transit, not just metros or light metros, which may seem to be a bit too ambitious challenge for some cities, but electric buses, as you will further expand on in the case of Dakar, is a very good opportunity to address both this power sector and mobility sector challenges. And I also appreciated the reference to the appropriate business model that some of those new investment in green mobility can offer to investors, with higher capex, making them easier to identify on the radar screen of institutional investors, and lower opex, providing for greater stability and maybe greater affordability as well for end users. So indeed, some very interesting I would say encouraging perspectives when it comes to steering future developments in mobility systems in developing countries towards a green mobility. Let me now come to the second dimension, the sort of more micro or concrete illustrative examples of some of the big trends we've discussed in this first part of our panel, and maybe going back to you again, Grégoire. So you mentioned in your intervention that the 5-minute city, and that's something that many developed metropolises are indeed now displaying as a goal for them to reach. Is it something, in your view, that would be realistic, and under which condition when applied to big urban metropolises in developing countries, or is it out of reach? So what's your views on the possibility to scale up that type of approach to a broader global scale?
Thank you. Thanks, Francois. That's a hard one. No, that's a hard one because, I mean, definitely cities, I mean, with some significant, as I was mentioning this, it's 15 minutes. So it's
15, yeah, 15. Yeah.
it's a bit easier. But cities like, I mean, here, Vienna, I mean, with lots of resources, lots of access to capital, you know, a huge fiscal basis, I mean, something to, and a very well, I mean, entrenched and organized planning system, I mean, it's easier. It's true also that when I was traveling for some business work to Sarajevo a month ago, well, maybe that's a different storyline. So I don't think it's not doable. I think it's and I think Barcelona also may speak to that. I mean, with this Super Quadra plan of theirs, but I think it's essentially about urban planning, and we know that it's extremely difficult. I mean, here at the World Bank, our colleagues from the urban sector are trying to work on housing, urban planning. You know, these are really far-reaching objectives, and that goes well beyond just organizing the city, but that touch upon the job markets where they are, and the structure of the industries, and so forth. But yes, this planning dimension is absolutely the first one, and we've seen actually interestingly also referring to when I was in the US, some reversal proposals. I mean, trying to move from urban patterns that are very specialized in terms of central business district, whereas residential parts, trying to recombine some more kind of mixed use organization of the land. Where I do believe that there is something, and it's not easy, but say a bit easier to do, is try to use a transport project as catalysts, to try to impulse. And here I could quote a couple of projects we were associated to in Brazil. One in the capital of Minas Gerais, Belo Horizonte, which precisely tried to revamp a few favelas, kind of slum areas, and try to irrigate them through, in that case, for BRT connection. I think there is a lot to do about trying to add mobility interventions together with housing, and it's not only housing; it's also water and sanitation and the whole thing. I think it can help, even if we know a transportation project can be difficult to implement. Bundling the two really adds more. Yes, using transportation, mass transit, but not only mass transit. I plan to discuss a bit about a metro project in São Paulo, but I do believe, with good bus effective network, it's, there's a lot to do also to improve this, not micromobility, but mobility overall. Of course, need the backbone from some bigger cities, but so again, I think it's doable. It takes a lot of organization. It takes a lot of continuity also in the decision-making process, which sometimes, at least in countries where the World Bank works, is not taken for granted, this continuity and continuity in policies. Thank you.
Thank you for these encouraging words, Grégoire. And indeed, what other examples may come to mind? I mean, I personally think of, very small targeted mobility systems such as cable cars in South American countries like Colombia, or escalators in some cases to better connect far outreaches or slums to the central business district, and in the process deliver a whole lot of socioeconomic benefits beyond green mobility. But we don't have time to delve too much into this. One aspect I'd like to sort of further develop, and maybe Gibet or Stefania, that would be something you might be keen to comment on and develop. It's the sort of funding model, and whether it would make sense, including in PPPs, at least PPPs with a public payment, government paid type PPPs, to sort of increase the level of public funding, to decrease the level of fees requested from the end user, going some way towards full sort of a free access to end users. Is that something? I mean, it's regularly talked about in political or electoral debate. Is it something that makes sense for you? And if so, what could be the right approach, in particular when trying to associate private financing? So, what about this idea of sort of minimizing the end user fee to further foster resorting to mass transit and better or greener mobility systems? Maybe Gibet, if you'd like to start. I mean, and you have also this idea of bike sharing. So what's the funding model that you have adopted in that case to make sure it is widely adopted by end users?
Yes, thank you, Francois. And let me just tell you shortly that from my experience and my perspective, not only in Barcelona, but before working in Barcelona, I have also been working in developing countries. And I think here it's not only a matter of how from public transport operators we can also improve maybe regulation, even to make things easier for the end user, and also influence on the price of public transportation for the end user. I think it is also a matter of how do we reduce cars in the cities. How do we reduce the use of private cars and individual cars? I guess I can guess that Stefania will also talk about that, because she was previously mentioning also why sometimes we need to take that private car, because in our mobility trends we are not only going from point A to point B, but we have several stops in the city. But however, I think that this is a very important issue, that also from public transport authorities, and again, I work for a public transport operator, not for the authority, but I think it's very important the role that these public transport authorities, particularly in developed countries, they play on fighting the cars in the city centers, because this allows, for example, for public transportation to improve also the results of public transportation. People, users of public transportation, people who need to use public transportation because active mobility does not allow them to get to the place where they need to go in the city, they also want efficient public transportation. And for that matter, we do need to have a priority to circulate in the cities, and also to have some, when it is a surface transportation, so buses or trams, we also need to be able to have priority also to be fast to take our users from one point to another in the city. So I think, of course, ideally, if there was enough funding from the public sector, we could eventually think about making it easy for the end user of public transportation. However, I think this is not the main issue that we need to address. I think we need to address how do we take cars out of our cities so that people make this real transfer to active mobility and to public transportation.
Mm-hmm. Stefania, you advise the European Commission on this?
I totally agree. And I was to add also another thing, that we are discussing very much in this time of electric car that are greener, that are, of course, but I just want to say that an electric car occupy the same space of an not electric one. So it's a problem of space, it's a problem how to want to use the space of our city. And so our public transportation project, as Gregoire said, can really reshape our cities in a more livable way. So this is really important. Regarding the funding and regarding the way how to finance it, what is really important, I think, is that we need to really change a little bit our mind, because when we are reshaping a city, so when we are introducing a new tram, or where we are introducing a new area where you can walk, we can take going for bike. What is happening is that, of course, you have a cost for doing that, but the revenue that we have back are not only related to the specific project, but are related to the city. This means that the houses that are in the area will be more attractive, and the cost of these houses will higher, and the security will be higher, and so this means that the people, the city can save money for security people to put there. So what we need to evaluate in order to say that how to fund this is also the other characteristics that usually are not considered at all. And this is really a different way of proceeding. And then let me say, Francois, I don't really think that if we have free public transportation, people will use more. It's not a question of to be free. It's a question of reliability of the system. It's a question of how the system answer to your needs. I don't really think that people will use. Look at what happening. I'm living in Rome, and there are a lot of sharing of e-moped, a lot, and they are not really cheap. But they are used in a very massive way, because they are answering to the people for the last miles transportation. And so this is really, really important. So what we need to do is how we move from transport to mobility. We need to move from mobility to to cities, to look at a general purpose of the city, putting together urbanistic transportation and livable security and whatever.
Okay, well, thanks to you both, Gibet and Stefania. I think you made a very clear point that indeed the cost recovery issue is an important one, but by no means that the critical or key driver in changing or reshaping end users' mobility, as you said, offering operational systems, whether it's for e-bikes or more traditional mobility systems, it is probably a precondition in any case. And beyond that, the cost issues, one may want to have a look as well to how to find additional sources of funding. And I believe you mentioned land value capture as a ways to internalize positive externalities and re-inject them in the funding of transport and mobility systems. We don't have much time to elaborate on this, but let's keep that in mind. And I would now turn back to both Grégoire and Mathieu. So over the last period of time, we've seen BRT, bus rapid transit, emerge as a sort of low-cost alternative to mass transit systems in emerging countries. Of course, the trade-off was that whereas mass transit like metro are electrically powered, BRT used to be powered with conventional fuels, whether gasoline or LNG. now we're seeing some first examples of electric BRT systems being implemented in emerging countries. Dakar BRT, in which both of you have been involved from IFC side and from Meridiam side, is a case in point. And I'd like to hear from you how you see the perspectives and the potential for this new ways of developing green mobility. So, as I'm not sure Mathieu is fully able to listen to me, maybe Grégoire, you could start, and then Mathieu would take on.
Okay. So yeah, indeed, the World Bank has been associated to the Dakar BRT. I don't have myself specific experience about this. What I can tell you, though, is that the World Bank as an institution and us in the transport practice are very strong believers of BRTs, and exactly for the reason that you say, Francois, because we can get that from a fraction of a cost to metro. We don't say, and I've been part of so many discussion whether it's better metro, BRT. That's a wrong way to put the thing, because they've addressed different markets, different needs at different point in times, different affordability question, because that's really boils down to that. But BRT, absolutely. I mean, for what you get in terms of a passenger transported per day, in terms also of integration with current and new systems. I'm referring here a little bit to a question I was reading in the chat from someone about informal transport. I mean, BRT can be a way also to try to address to some extent informal transport. And we've had some cases. I'm thinking about Colombia cases about where informal stakeholders are or try to be integrated in the BRT system, either as feeders, either being trained, etc. So, and now that and we've seen how the price of batteries have been divided by almost 10 years from now. I mean, there is also this dimension about the decarb thing. I won't mention trolleybuses, but it may sound a bit kind of of the 50s or 70s technology, but it is still a possibility, so long as, of course, the grid is a little bit clean, and it depends a lot on the countries.
Yeah, thank you very much, Grégoire. Maybe, Mathieu, if you can hear us, you've got 2-3 minutes to maybe give the example.
I will say a few words on the BRT, and again, sorry, I didn't hear the question from Francois, but just a few words. I mean, the BRT in Dakar, that's a project indeed which has been developed by the government of Senegal and IFC, the IFC advisory. That's a proper PPP, which is a first in that sense, divided in two components. I mean, one is not a PPP, that's public procurement for building the dedicated lane. That's a public procurement of works. But then the rest, which is the acquisition of buses, some systems, and running the operations over 15 years, that's a concession, which after some years of efforts of procurement and exchanges with the authorities is financially sustainable. It means that there is, at the end of the day, the possibility for the investor to invest, equity, to raise debt, and to be remunerated with the end users, and even pay a concession fee, a regular one, to the grantor. So that will contribute, of course, to the amortization of the overall assets and some other works for the grantor. Of course, not totally, but partially. So that's in that sense quite a success. We expect the traffic to be there next year when the operations will start. That's the middle of the construction at this stage, and after having signed the concession agreement, we are working in order to raise the debt and order the buses. These are electric buses, which, as I said earlier, have some very interesting features. They first of all will become one of the largest power consumer and client for the state utility.
Mathieu, I think we have to wrap up.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. So
Yeah,
sorry,
sure.
we
We
had
need
some
to wrap
technical
up.
issues, but we need to wrap up. Thanks again
Yeah,
to all the
so
panelists.
I will stop there. I don't hear Françoise, as I told you many times.
Thanks
so,
again
many
to all the
thanks.
panelists. We've
Yeah.
now sort of exhausted our time allocated. So thanks again to everyone, and you can refer to some of the panelists' website structures if you want to go to get more information. Thank you.
So thank you very much.